Everyone, we did it. The great battle between the US and the giant balloon from China is officially over, and not surprising, we won. The US spends nearly $1 trillion a year on military, and we spent close to $1 million using the most advanced F-22 Raptor to take down a balloon. But what if I told you there's more to the story? What if this balloon is a facade covering something much more dangerous at play? Yes, the US government had every right to shoot down the balloon. The Chinese balloon illegally entered into US airspace, and every nation is entitled to defend itself. But a better question to ask is, was it necessary for the US to do so? Let's bring in some experts to dissect the exact threat of this Chinese balloon, but also reveal the scary truth of what could happen next in the US and China relationship. Everyone, today's important message is brought to you by Morning Brew, a daily newsletter I use to receive the latest business insights in just 5 minutes a day. As a YouTuber who covers geopolitics, Morning Brew has quickly become the first thing I read in the morning to get up to speed on the world's latest events. Just look at this important sentence from the February 6th newsletter. The balloon's debris was scattered across 7 miles of the sea, but the geopolitical fallout from its doomed voyage is much wider. This is exactly what we'll be discussing in today's video. Morning Brew is a free newsletter that is delivered Monday through Sunday, and if you enjoy business, finance, or tech, you absolutely should be subscribing. The best part? It's completely free and takes less than 15 seconds to subscribe. Simply go to morningbrewdaily.com/Cyrus or click the link in the description below to get started. Let's start today's analysis by establishing some fundamental facts. Since the US and China are the world's two leading superpowers, it's important to know that both countries have spied on each other for decades. This is not something new. Listen to CNN host Fareed Zakaria break it down.
The Chinese have about 600 military satellites hovering around the world. They have photographed every square inch of the United States. There are other means by which you can get this stuff. Of course, the United States is the world's greatest, has the world's greatest intelligence capabilities. We spy on the Chinese all the time, using many, many different mechanisms. So there seems something a little bit irrational about suddenly having this kind of paranoid attack about one balloon that we happened to see when we did nothing about ones that had passed through before.
Fareed does a great job bringing some common sense to the discussion. The US and China have and always will spy on each other. Just look back to this article from the Defense Post in July 2022. It reveals the US government planned to launch similar balloons to spy on both China and Russia. But Fareed also brings up another red flag to the story. At the end of that clip, notice how he states similar Chinese balloons have passed through American airspace before. This Business Insider article reveals Chinese balloons crossed into American airspace, not once, but 3 times during the Trump administration alone. It's quite ironic because former President Trump was very quick to claim that Biden has surrendered American airspace to communist China. But if Donald Trump, the most American president of all time, allowed the same thing to happen on his watch, we have to question, how serious of a threat is this balloon? Listen to ex-CIA and FBI officer Phil Mudd break it down.
On a scale of 1 to 10 on national security issues, I'll politely, Fareed, give it about a 2. This says a lot more about the inability of Washington and Congress and the White House to talk about relatively insignificant national security issues than it does about intelligence. Look, if the Chinese want to collect photos of America, you can get to Google Earth, you can get a Chinese secret satellite. If they want to intercept communications, they can do it with satellites. I would agree that there are certain advantages a balloon would have, but Fareed, we twisted ourselves around a balloon for days in Washington, D.C., and the Secretary of State canceled a trip for a balloon. Give me a break. This is a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10.
So we have a former CIA and FBI senior intelligence officer bring some much needed rational thinking to the hysterical reporting by US media. This balloon represented a very small security threat to the United States, but it completely paralyzed politicians for nearly 1 week in Washington. Our reaction was based on optics, domestic politics, the Biden administration worrying about what the Republicans were saying. The threat doesn't feel that serious. And in my opinion, it was a lost opportunity for America to engage with China. Instead of talking and discussing the situation with China, the US blew it out of proportion and canceled Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to China. Fareed reveals why this wasn't a smart move for the future of the US-China relationship.
There are a lot of urgent issues that the United States needs to deal with China on. Yeah. You know, as I say, we're in a new world. We're in a world where we have a great power that is not dependent on the US for security like Japan or Germany. Powerful country, economically a competitor. We need to find a way to have an adult relationship with China.
We need to find a way to have an adult relationship with China. I like those thoughts. And like I mentioned at the start of this video, there is something more dangerous at play here. The Chinese flew a balloon into the US airspace. Again, it was wrong and the US had every right to take it down. But this matter should have been resolved with better communication and certainly didn't need the media hyping the story up and alarming the entire nation about a Chinese balloon. There's always more to the story.
We have a long history of when these kind of things happen, intelligence agencies and the government inflate the threat, tell you that there's some kind of vital danger that there wasn't. I mean, this is the same intelligence agencies told us Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. So one has to take that with a healthy dose of skepticism, given what I said, the facts, which is everybody who knows anything about this subject says you can get much more and much better images out using spy satellites.
Media today has one important job: create division and chaos among society. Fear is one of the most powerful human emotions to tap into. If the media can make you fear something, they can alter how your mind works and ultimately persuade you to support anything they want. This played out in full force some 20 years ago with the US invasion into Iraq. We knew Saddam Hussein did not have nuclear weapons, but the US government manufactured a lie about weapons of mass destruction to deceive the American public into supporting a war against Iraq. Colin Powell, the then Secretary of State, led a presentation to the United Nations which ultimately resulted in America invading Iraq. He would later go on to state, "I regret it. I will always regret it. It was a terrible mistake on all our parts and the intelligence community, but I'm not looking for an excuse. I gave that presentation." I don't blame Americans for supporting the Iraq war. Our government lied to us and convinced us that Saddam was the biggest threat to global peace. But this effort to change America's opinion is called manufacturing consent. It's something everyone should be aware of because it very well could happen again with China. Just listen to Senator Marco Rubio's recent comments.
I think the broader relationship between the U.S. and China, to anyone who has any doubts about it, now the bottom line is here, and that is we are now, China has been for some time and will be the primary strategic adversary of the United States, and we should be focused on it because what they're trying to do is create a world in which they are the most powerful nation and the United States is a great power in decline. That is what they believe to be the case. That is what they are working on, and we have to determine whether we're going to allow the world to head in that direction or not.
This is the extreme stance of many far-right GOP politicians. They are preaching to the world that China wants to see the US decline and China wants to rule the world. I believe this analysis from Marco Rubio is flawed. China doesn't want to see the American economy collapse or decline. China holds nearly $1 trillion of US Treasury bonds, and the Chinese economy depends on international trade. It is not in China's best interest to see the American economy collapse, the same way it is not in America's best interest to see the Chinese economy collapse. China and the US are both superpowers, and like Fareed said earlier, we must learn to have an adult relationship with China. If in fact America is declining in power, we must stop blaming others and address our own domestic issues. Fareed, once again, has the answer.
China is a powerful economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, and the United States should try to make sure it remains the most powerful country in the world. The way to do that, by the way, is to invest in America, to invest in American jobs, precisely what the Biden administration is doing, to maintain strong alliances. None of that requires this. And by the way, how come Marco Rubio didn't say anything when these balloons were flying over during the Trump administration? This is just one more indication of how everything, even a balloon, has become a fodder for kind of crazy partisan warfare in Washington these days.
But now let me bring your attention to an opinion piece from the Washington Post entitled, "The Frenzy Over China's Spy Balloon is Dangerous and Unwarranted." Author Max Boot goes on to state, "The frenzy over the spy balloon underlines the need to establish better lines of communications with Beijing to prevent US-China tensions from spiraling out of control." Tensions between the US and China are already considerably high. Just last week, the American press ran a story of US Air Force General Michael Minihan, who stated, "My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. Is the US already trying to condition the American public to go to war with China?" The US general went on to state that we need to aim for the head when dealing with the Chinese. Take a moment and ask yourself, what if a Chinese general said the same comments about America? How would the American media and public react? Of course, the most likely conflict with China could come over the island of Taiwan. China has dreams of reunifying Taiwan with the mainland, but has patiently waited for decades for this to happen. China will continue to wait, as even Xi Jinping himself has stated that peace or reunification is China's goal. As I've stated several times in previous videos, China is not stupid and it is in no position to invade Taiwan. They would gain absolutely nothing and lose everything. Taiwan plays an integral part of the world's economy and dominates the microchip market that powers every modern machine on the planet. Even the smartest Washington, D.C. think tanks are advising the U.S. to approach the Taiwan situation with caution and smart diplomacy. War with China can and should be avoided, but the U.S. certainly makes it more likely, assuming it's inevitable, and consistently hyping up these exaggerated fears of China. What I don't want to see is history repeat itself. The U.S. launched itself into a war with Vietnam because of the domino theory, a belief that communism would spread like dominoes throughout Asia unless the U.S. intervened. Of course, the U.S. did intervene. We lost 58,000 soldiers and withdrew, leaving Vietnam the same way we entered, as a communist country. We spent 20 years and $2 trillion fighting a war in Afghanistan, only to withdraw our troops and once again leave Afghanistan in the same position we found it, under the rule of the Taliban. Given our military failures, what makes America confident we could win a direct war with the #2 most powerful country in the world? And I don't want to speculate who would win, because if the US and China go to war, it would be a disaster for the entire globe. In conclusion, I'll say it once again, China was wrong to send its balloon into the US airspace. China could have done a much better job communicating from the beginning, and the US government had every right to take the balloon down. If the roles were reversed and an American balloon entered into Chinese airspace, I'm sure China's government would have reacted in a similar fashion. But instead of arguing over a balloon, both sides should be sitting down and discussing the important issues with each other. The big loss from this ordeal is Antony Blinken not going to Beijing. This was supposed to be a trip where the Secretary of State could follow up with what President Biden and President Xi discussed at the most recent G20 meeting last November. Watch today's video again and take note of the experts like Phil Mudd, the ex-FBI security advisor, and CNN anchor Fareed Zakaria. Thankfully, there are American voices that are speaking up and bringing common sense and rational thinking to this important discussion. Both the US and China should be doing everything in their power to avoid an unnecessary war, for when the US and China battle, the entire world will lose. But as always, we'll keep you up to date on the latest news surrounding this important US and China relationship. And don't forget to sign up for the Morning Brew newsletter. It's free, takes less than 15 seconds to register, and delivers witty, relevant, and informative news to your inbox every morning and only takes 5 minutes to read. Simply go to morningbrewdaily.com/Cyrus and register today. Everyone, thank you for spending time with me here on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next video.